Good evening. Hi, everyone. My name's Dr. Amanda DiDiego, and I'm the Interim Dean for University of Wyoming-Casper. I'd like to take a moment briefly to thank Casper College for 40 years of outstanding programming as part of their annual Humanities Festival. We at UW-Casper are very proud to be part of this long-standing tradition. I'm more thrilled to introduce our Demorest Keynote speaker for the evening. Dr. Robert Paul Maddox II is a counselor educator at the University of Wyoming at Casper. His academic credentials include a Ph.D. in counselor education and supervision, an EDS in counseling education, and an MA in community counseling. Additionally, he's a licensed professional counselor and a nationally certified counselor with experience in school and clinical mental health counseling. He currently serves as the Play Therapy Online Graduate Certificate Program Coordinator for the University of Wyoming. He also coordinates the Counselor Education Program's school counseling track at the University of Wyoming's Casper Branch campus. Dr. Maddox has published articles and presented at state, regional, national, and international conferences regarding a variety of topics such as play therapy, trauma-informed care, ethics, addictions treatment, school counseling, creativity in counseling, experiential learning, data utilization, assessment, program evaluation, and accreditation. Please join me in welcoming my colleague and my friend, Dr. Paul Maddox.
Okay. Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for that introduction, Dr. DiDiego. Now, as Dr. DiDiego was sharing, I am a faculty member at the University of Wyoming at Casper in the Counselor Education Program. And with that, part of what I do there is I research and I teach about play therapy and play-based interventions and play in general. And I'm hoping as we go through this evening that you'll be able to engage with me some in learning about play and also recognize where you might have play in your own life, because I think it's fundamentally important. We're going to be talking about more than just fun and games, using play to explore communication, connection, and self-discovery. All right. So I've already shared a little bit about my background. One thing I think is important that you should know about me as well is I work a lot with, outside of the university, I work a lot with children and their families. And because of that, I'm always looking for how can I not only be effective with the clients and the kids that I work with, but how can I continue to become more effective? And through the years, I've found for me to be able to do that, knowing more and engaging in play and knowing how to use play has been the gateway for me to be able to become more and more effective in working with people. And I'm going to share some insights on why that might be, and hopefully for you, you can connect it to some things in your own life too. So I'm wondering, those of you who are in the audience and those watching live, what is it what interests do you have regarding the topic of play? I want you to think about that. What about play? Why am I coming here this evening to hear some guy talk about play when I could be out playing myself, doing other things? But what is it about play that interests you, and what do you hope to gain from our discussion today? I want you to kind of put that in your mind, and hopefully as we go through, we can meet some of those expectations, but if we don't, we're going to have some time at the end for some Q&A as well. Okay, now, I know we're here to talk about play, but something that you'll find out talking to a lot of my students and supervisees is when it comes to play, I get serious. I get serious about play because I think it's fundamental and it's important. And with that, we're not just going to, I did joke earlier with somebody. I said, maybe I should have brought my unicycle and rode around or done something. I'm not very good at unicycle. I'd probably fall all over the place. But it's not about just putting on a fun, happy show when it comes to play, because play can be a serious thing and it can be hard work for a lot of kids, a lot of children, and adults too, as we'll get into this. But what are our objectives tonight? One is I hope that we can explore. I want to be able to explore with you how play serves as one of the first and most natural forms of communication for individuals. Play is our first language, okay? I also want us to be able to examine how play creates safe spaces for vulnerability and connection. Couples that play together stay together. Families that play together stay together. How do we connect with others? It's through our play, because actually, like I mentioned just a moment ago, that's our natural form of communication. So we need to engage in play for us to be able to connect and socialize with others effectively. Third, I want us to be able to hopefully discover how play can unlock insights about ourselves, discover how play can strengthen relationships, and also discover how through play we can provide a universal language that bridges differences, which I think is really speaks to the power that play can have in our lives. So, some past experiences for me. What led me to utilize play therapy and play-based approaches in my work? Well, early in my career, I started out as a counselor, and I did not want to work with children at all. I wanted to work with adults. And I was dead set on that. And I remember one of my first clinical placements that I had, I remember they told me, okay, you can work with adults, but since you're provisionally licensed at this point, the adults that you're going to work with are going to be all court-ordered. They're all court-ordered individuals. And I started working with adults and with that caseload, and I believe I was pretty effective and was doing a good job. And at the same time, every day I'd come home and I feel more and more drained. And I'm like, what's going on with this? I'm starting to feel burnout. And I remember going to my clinical supervisor at the time, and I said, I'm not sure what it is about the caseload that I'm working with, but it seems like every day is a struggle, it's a grind, and it's really depleting me. And I remember she said, well, we can, try to change your caseload up, but that means you're going to have to work with kids if you want to do that. And I'm like, well, okay, I'll try. And I'll never forget one of the first child clients I had. They came in, and I had been trained in all the what I call the BTs, the behavioral therapies, the CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, RBT, rational motive behavioral therapy, DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. And I was effective in doing that with the adult clients that I was working with, but I'll never forget the first kid that came in as my client. Here I was prepared. I'm like, all right, we're going to work with this kid. And again, thinking from that cognitive behavioral kind of perspective, part of that approach is you identify thought distortions and you dispute, coming from an RBT perspective, you're disputing the irrational thoughts. Now, I don't know how many of you all have ever worked with a 5-year-old. Have you ever been around a 5-year-old? Here comes the 5-year-old. Okay, 5-year-old client, come in. Let's sit down together and tell me what brings you in so we can identify. Y'all are laughing now? We can identify the irrational thoughts that you have and the thought distortions, and we're going to challenge those and help you change your way of thinking. Now, if you've ever been around a 5-year-old, you'll identify very quickly that nearly every thought that a 5-year-old has from an adult perspective is irrational or a thought distortion in some way. So I very quickly realized, hey, some of this stuff that I learned that's possibly works well with adults probably is not going to work as well with kids. And so I'm like, oh goodness, I'm going to need to get some more skills and find out how can I do this. And that's what led me to start to seek out what is it that works with working with children. And I found play and play therapy and play-based approaches. And as I started going to more trainings and learning more about that, then I quickly realized, wait a second. Part of the reason why some of that other stuff doesn't work as well with kids is because I'm not speaking their language. Play is the language of children. And as I've gone on in my career, I've started to realize play is actually the language of adults too. And so for me, that has led me into how do I work with people in general, whether I'm working with them therapeutically as a counselor or whether I'm teaching or even when the research that I conduct, I always try to keep in mind how can I communicate and interact with people around me, and keep in mind that play is at the foundation of all of our communications, whether we want to recognize it or not. And so how do I use this in my interactions? Well, with kids, I try to recognize that what they say to me might not be what they mean, because they communicate through their play. It's important that I have toys and other objects for them to be able to communicate with me. How do I use play in my interactions with adolescents? Well, I recognize that for adolescents, being able to build relationships and connect with people, and that emotional aspect is so vitally important. And how do I do that? Well, I've got to know how they're playing so I can connect with them. With adults, how do I interact using play? Well, sometimes I have to change my verbiage up a little bit, and I have a slide talking about this later on. But sometimes I have to recognize that adults, we don't, we're beyond the play, or some of us. That's the reason why I'm wearing a suit tonight, right? We're beyond the play. But at the same time, maybe we're not. Maybe we just label it as something else. How many of you all have ever talked to a counselor or read anything about mental health and it talks about, oh, we need more self-care? Is anybody? Guess what that's really saying? Hey, we need more play in our life, because play is how we can connect. That's how we relax. That's how we rejuvenate ourselves. And so how do I use that with adults? Well, let's explore what kind of self-care do you engage in, i.e., what kind of play do you allow yourself to engage with? Now, what is the importance of play? As you can see here, play is the most natural form of communication for people. It's the natural way that people communicate. You look at children early on, how do they communicate? Play. Even if you look at animals, you look at most mammals, when they're young, they do communicate with each other, and they do it through play. You'll see puppies, they're playing, and kittens, they're playing, and other animals, they play. Why? Because they're communicating. It's the natural way that we communicate. Now, some of you may be like, well, no, play, I hear what you're saying about play being in communication, but that's only when you're a child, not necessarily as we grow through adulthood. And I would say, I'm not so sure, because I don't know how many of you all, but when I went to college in my undergrad, they made everybody take a public speaking and a communications course. Has anyone in here been in a communications or public speaking course? One of the first things that they tell you is, when it comes to communication, a majority of communication is what? Is it verbal or nonverbal? Nonverbal, right? Nonverbal. Well, what is the nonverbal communication for most people? It's their play. Play is just a nonverbal way of communicating with others, and I would say even with ourselves. Okay? Now, when it comes to working with children especially, but again, I think with adults as well, objects or toys are like words. a well-known play therapist and researcher in the play therapy world, Dr. Gary Landreth. He writes that play is the language and toys are the words. That's how we communicate. And for children, I need to be able to have those words available to them if I'm going to interact. I need to be able to understand and speak their language. Even with adults, your objects become your words. And some of you may be like, well, no, that's not the case. Objects aren't my words. I don't use object for my words. And I would say, well, maybe you do. Right? I don't know about you, but I got a text message the other day that had very few words in it. It had all these emojis listed. It had symbolic representations in it. It had objects of some sort on the screen. And that was communicating something to me. So don't tell me that objects don't become our words. It seems like that's where we're all starting to go to anyway. Now, while many adults talk verbally about their experiences, thoughts, and feelings, people can use other mediums to explore their experiences and express what they think and how they feel. We see this a lot through mediums such as the arts. I'll talk about here in a moment. For me, a vital component of play is music. How do I really engage in some of the purest and deepest forms of play for myself? That's being able to play music and be able to play with a group and connect. It's how I can explore my experiences and understand more about myself. Other people, it may be visual arts. It may be acting. It may be dance. For some, it's creating things with their hands. But we all engage in play, and it helps us to be able to use the mediums of play to be able to express and understand more about what we think and how we feel. Now, what are some of the benefits? Play helps with brain development. There's ample research over the last over 100 years that shows that brain development is impacted by one's availability to be able to play. Okay? Because, and in recent decades, we've been able to look more from the neurobiological perspective and see through brain scans and things how engaging in play helps the brain to develop certain neural pathways and to have more brain integration, which if you know much about, for example, trauma-informed care, brain integration helps with healing after trauma. But if you don't have that, then you're going to experience more detrimental effects from different types of traumatic experiences and adverse experiences. And with this, it's vital that we recognize, how does the brain develop? How do we get those that ability to be resilient and how to engage in healthy coping? It's through play, because it's building the neural pathways that we need within the brain, between the different parts of the brain, to be able to navigate certain situations in our life. There's also been research looking at what happens when you deprive people of play. Specifically, younger children. When you take play away, or you say, no, you've got to work on this, and you're not allowed to engage in play. Play deprivation can actually lead to more emotional dysregulation, depression, difficulties with social, emotional, and behavioral regulations, impulsivity, and struggles adapting, and ultimately less resiliency. So whenever I see adults or institutions or individuals taking all play away from a child, it really concerns me. And when I see adults not allowing themselves or trying to prevent other adults from engaging in play, it concerns me as well. Why? Because we all need this. This is how we regulate. This is how we have stress management, healthy coping skills. It's through play. Also, there's been numerous research studies that look at play's effect in terms of education and the learning environment, and ultimately, the research seems to keep coming back and pointing to the way that children actually learn is through play. There's actually been some studies that look at, for example, things like reading. And there are children who learn how to read without any formal education, but they are allowed to engage in free play and be able to interact with books and things in a playful manner. There's also a famous study, and I have it in my reference list, about 15 years ago, that looked at, for example, play therapy and play-based approaches, and it looked at elementary school students who were academically at risk and were struggling academically. And they put them in two different groups, and they had one group that received 30 minutes of play therapy each week, and another group that received just the what I would say the normal academic intervention, and another one that didn't. That was more of a control group with that. And ultimately, after several weeks of going through those different types of treatment effects, they were assessing them on the academic side of things. And it was a study by P.J. Blanco out of Texas, University of North Texas at the time. I believe he's with Texas Women's now University. But with that, they found that at the end of the period of time, the quarter that they were looking at, the academics time, the group that received the play scored higher and outperformed the other two groups, which is always profound to me and sticks out to me on, wait a second, there was a group that was getting the standard, this is for academics, but then it stands out, it kind of spoke to me in a way of saying, well, maybe even through the play, they're learning. And maybe they're learning the things they need to learn to be able to help with the other parts. We'll get into that a little bit more here in a moment. The third thing is looking at play. It supports mental health and well-being. Research has indicated that play increases drive and motivation, and it improves interpersonal skills. For example, when I say interpersonal skills, being able to effectively interact with and relate to others, which I don't know about you, but I think in our society today, this is such an important skill that we all need. How can we effectively interact with others and relate with others? And how can we couple that with the learning that we can get from play and the intrinsic motivation that comes with that? And helps us and helping us to be resilient. When you start putting all these things together, you start to realize how important play is. Now, I think it's important now, if we're talking about play, that we actually define what we're meaning, okay? When we define play, as you can see here, play, first of all, involves activities that are intrinsically motivated, not extrinsically, intrinsically motivated. They include active engagement, and they produce joyous discovery. Now, specifically, what do we mean by that? Specifically, play can be defined as being spontaneous in nature, enjoyable. It's a voluntary activity, and it's non-goal directed. True play is free from evaluation and judgment. Now, I want you to think about in your own life, how often do you engage in an activity that meets this definition? something that's spontaneous, it's enjoyable, I really like doing this, it's voluntary, nobody's forcing me to do this. It's non-goal directed. In other words, just engaging in this activity in and of itself is the purpose, not to create some kind of specific outcome. Now, could there be outcomes and goals? Sure, but that's not the point of it. And also, is it free from evaluation and judgment? Now, I told you earlier that one way that I play is music. I love to engage with music. But for me, to be able to effectively engage in music, I need to be able to play music that's free from evaluation and judgment. That can be a tall order sometimes, even for ourselves. Because sometimes I even find myself like, oh man, I hit a clunker on that one. I'm just no good anymore. I shouldn't play anymore. But then I have to remind myself, no, that's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is to be rejuvenating, to be able to help me be who I need to be and who I want to be with this. Something else I think is important to point out is when we're talking about play, meeting this definition, which sometimes this is called free play, this is actually something that the United Nations has declared a universal right of childhood. Actually, it's in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, Article 31. If you look at that, it includes play as one of the rights of childhood. And why do I point this out? Because so many times in our communities and in our society, I see instances where children are not being allowed to engage in this type of activity, this type of play. And I often will warn adults, if you're taking all play away from a child, according to the United Nations, it could be considered a human rights violation. Why? Because we all need this. Again, I already shared, it helps with our brain development. It's how we learn. It's how we interact with the world. It's so vitally important. Because I truly believe people, particularly children, but all people, need to play as much as they need to sleep and eat. So what are some key aspects? Giving that definition of play, what are some key aspects of play behavior? Well, first of all, true play does not occur in novel or frightening situations. I don't know about you, but if I drug one of you up here with me right now, and everybody's going, oh no, don't do that, right? But if I were to ask one of you to come up here, I got you up here, and I'm like, now play, how likely would you be able to just engage in some free play? Some of you are laughing right now. You're probably not going to be able to. Why? Because that would probably be a frightening and a very novel situation. Oh, here comes this guy, and he's pulling me up on stage and asking me to play and do this in front of everybody. It's the same with children. I don't know about you. I remember my son, he's actually in the audience. I remember one of the first times I took him, my wife and I, we took him to a Chuck E. Cheese. Has anybody ever been to a Chuck E. Cheese? You know, it's like sensory overload. And he was so excited to go. And then we walk in there, and like for the first, few minutes, he's just like, I don't know what to do right now. He was like frozen. And why? And I'm like, oh, go play. Let's go play. And then I had to remind myself, true play can't happen right now because it's a new, novel situation, which can be frightening to kids. And so then I had to meet him where he was at and be like, we can go play together, but you can take the lead, and here we go. And after a few minutes, most kids adapt, and they're resilient, and they go on and they can start playing. But we have to recognize play does not occur in novel or frightening situations. Another key aspect of play is satisfying. In and of itself, play is satisfying. I do not need to bribe a person to truly play. If I want them to play, that in and of itself will be satisfying. But if I'm having to bribe them, maybe it's not really play that's occurring. Maybe it's some kind of behavior of, I'm not sure what to do right now. I'm kind of scared, so I'm going to try to act and give you what I think you want. But if I want the benefits of play, I have to actually help facilitate the engagement of play. And so play in and of itself needs to be satisfying. Something else, play has a flow loss of self-consciousness. What do I mean by that? Well, I don't know about you, but have you ever been to a playground and been around, where there's lots of kids and you've got the 4 to 6 year olds there, and they're engaged in playing around the jungle gyms? And I don't know about you, but as I've watched some of those interactions, invariably there's the one kid that they are Batman. They're not pretending to be, they are Batman, right? And, they're trying to jump from the top of the monkey bars, and they're doing all the acrobatics and they're doing all the things. Why? Because in that moment, they are engaged in true play. They are Batman at that moment. And with that in mind, if that's ever been your child, that's Batman at that moment, and you're like, oh, we got to get to our next errand. We got to go pick something up from the pharmacy, or we got to go, and you're like, hey, come on, let's go. How likely are they going to be like, okay, I'm just coming? I see someone shaking their head. No. Why is that? Why? Because they're in that state, that flow loss of self-consciousness. They're not worried about anybody else. They've lost track of what time is because they are engrossed in this moment, in this play. Now, as adults, guess what? We do the same thing. We engage in play. Have you ever been doing something and then you look up and you're like, oh my gosh, it's like 11 o'clock at night. Where did the time go? Working on some kind of hobby or engaged in some type of activity. You get that flow loss. And when you're truly engaged in that, you're not worrying if anybody else is judging you. You're not thinking about what do other people think of this right now. Why? Because you're engaged in true play. That's a key aspect of play. One last thing that I think it's important to point out about play, and hopefully you're starting to pick this up from some of the examples I'm giving, is play can be highly variable across situations and individuals. What's play for me may not be really play for you. But what's play for you may not be the same as for me, and that's okay. But for it to be play, it does need to have some of these characteristics. Okay? But what those activities are and what they can mean and what they end up producing may vary. Now, what are some of the types of play? Up to this point, I've been talking a whole lot about free play. Play where you're just engaged and you get to make it up as you go along. We see this a lot with children. It's vitally important for children to engage in free play. It helps us with our creativity and helps us to develop new neural pathways, as we talked about before. But free play can look different, like I was just saying, can look different. Sometimes there's solo play, where you have a kid and they're just playing by themselves. Even when there's others around, they're just doing their thing. There's also parallel play. You see this often with, 2 and 3 year olds, where you get a group of kids together and they're playing, but they're not playing with each other. They're playing alongside each other, but they're still engaged in play. But they're doing that in parallel. And actually, some of that goes with that developmental perspective of how our brain develops. And it's going from, helping to develop the neural pathways from our brainstem into our mesolimbic system, which the mesolimbic system of our brain is what helps us It's the part of our brain that deals with emotions, but also our connections with others and how do we build relationships. And so you see that parallel play because they're starting to bridge some of those neural pathways, and then they're starting to see, okay, if I play this and they're playing this, okay, we can play together but not together. But as people grow and develop, you often see that parallel play start to transition, and you start to see more cooperative or collaborative play. And this is how we learn how to interact with one another. This is how we problem solve. And this is where we start to understand that sometimes the purpose of the play is to understand one another and to communicate. And with that, when you start to see this type of play occur, this type of free play, you'll see people being able to start to navigate differences in a variety of ways. I don't know about you, but growing up, I remember going to the park down the street from my house with other kids from the neighborhood, and we would play baseball. Okay? We would play baseball. Now, a lot of kids play baseball. And a lot of kids today play baseball. But there is a difference between going down the street to the park and playing baseball with the neighborhood kids and the Little League traveling ball team baseball. Why would I say that? Well, first and foremost, the Little League traveling team baseball that goes around and they've got the nice uniforms and doing all that, are they playing? Maybe. I say maybe because that form of baseball has very strict rules. It has expectations. It's not necessarily free from evaluation and judgment. It's not always spontaneous. It can be enjoyable, but sometimes it's not. Have any of y'all ever been to a Little League game and realized that some kids are not enjoying this at all? Right? Are they engaged in play? But the baseball game that I'm talking about, where you're going down the street playing with the neighborhood kids, in that, kids start to realize for us to be able to engage in this, sometimes we have to make up our own rules. Sometimes we have to modify things. Sometimes we have to get along with one another, because if we don't get along with one another, the kid who has the bat may take his bat and go home, and the kid who has the ball may take his ball and go home. Then we can't play the game anymore. But if we actually engage in this free play that becomes cooperative and collaborative, we learn how to interpersonally interact with one another, and we learn about ourselves too. What is it that we truly value? Do we truly value, oh, I've got to win? Or do we start to value, I want to play? Because they're not always the same. With that, you also get into what I call mixed age play, and that's not just my description. The research that's been done on play talks about mixed age play. And this is where you have play from different developmental stages and different age groups playing together. This can include older siblings with younger siblings, older kids with younger kids, but also adults with kids, or adults with adolescents. And with that, when I'm talking about mixed age play, I'm talking about actual play where you're both engaged, but no one is in charge. You may say, how does that work? Well, I think to start to understand this, you have to also understand there is something that a lot of our communities and a lot of in our society we inadvertently believe is play, as far as that beneficial type of play, but actually may not be. And that's directed playful activities. I'm not saying that these aren't aren't things that can be helpful at times, but it's not true play. Directed playful activities can be playful and fun, but they're not always fully play. I'll give you an example. There was a number of years ago, I was supervising a counselor, and we were working with a family in a therapeutic sense. They came in for counseling. And one of the first things we do is we try to meet with the parents. And I try to gauge and assess and appraise, okay, what seems to be the difficulties, the challenges, what's bringing you into counseling. And I'll never forget, one of the questions that I ask is, how often does your child play? Tell me about their play. And this parent, very proudly, they say, my child plays all the time, every day. Okay, tell me about the play that they engage in. Well, they've got piano lessons on Monday, and they've got soccer practice on Tuesday, and they've got Cub Scouts on Wednesday, and on Thursday they've got, karate, and on Friday they've got youth group and choir practice at church, and they play every single day. Now, using the definition of play that we were talking about earlier, how often does that child probably play? Not very much. They're engaged in a whole lot of directed playful activities, which can be beneficial, which can be helpful. But they needed some time to play. And I remember the first time that child came into a session, for a play session for counseling, they didn't know what to do. They come in and they just stood there. And they were waiting for someone to tell them what to do. And I remember working with the counselor that I was supervising, and they were like, yeah, the child really didn't do much in that session. I said, no, but they were communicating volumes to you. Because when they walked into that session, they were wanting to know, are you going to be like every other adult and try to dictate and direct and control what I'm doing? Or do you really mean what you say? Because one of the things that working with counselors who are starting to work with kids, when they walk into a room with all these toys, a playroom, one of the first things that they say to the child is, in here you can play with the toys in most of the ways that you'd like to. And that child wanted to know, do you really mean that? Now, after a while, that child began to trust that counselor. And did they start to engage in that kind of play? They sure did. They did. And they communicated lots of different things through their play. But they needed the opportunity to be able to engage in that and not be controlled or told what to do with that. Why? Because if you're being controlled and told all the time, how will you ever know what you truly are experiencing, what you truly think? So with this, I want us to be thinking the things that we engage in play. Are they play or are they directed activities that could carry with them evaluation and judgment and expectations and things that may actually get in the way of us being able to develop that resiliency and those coping skills that we need to truly navigate and adapt to the world around us. Because of this, I think it's important that we start to look at, if we're looking at incorporating play, it's more, there needs to be a perspective shift. It's more than entertainment. It's not frivolous. Play is fundamental. Play facilitates learning, understanding, and it helps us to have developmentally responsive coping skills. I'll give you a quick example here. In the play therapy class that I regularly teach, very first day of class, I have an activity that we do where I ask all the students to get into groups, and then I want them to create a mural of how children view their world. And invariably, I get the same types of murals almost every time. I get all these murals that have lots of rainbows and depictions of toys and activities, and it's always, super colorful. And then after they create these murals, I have them put them up on the wall. I say, tell me what you notice about them. And they're all saying about the same thing. Oh, they're so colorful, and they're so this, and they're so that. And then I show them examples of drawings that actual children have made. And while some of them may be colorful, there's lots of children who, when they draw how they view the world or how they view their world, it's much darker. It's not as happy. It doesn't have all these things. And one thing I point out to my students is, what was the purpose of the activity? What was the prompt? Oh, to create a mural of how children view their world. I say, but what did we create? Almost everybody creates how adults believe children view their world versus how children actually view their world. Because one of the things that we often don't realize is, as adults, sometimes we have forgotten what it's like to be a child. And with that, I ask my students in my play therapy course, I say, I have an assignment for you that should be, after that activity, I say, I have an assignment for you that should be the easiest assignment you'll ever have in graduate school. But then it's also the assignment that some students find the hardest. And the assignment that I give them is, before the end of the semester, I'm going to ask that you go and engage in a day of play. Now, it should be easy enough just to do that. Go do a day of play. And people, I would think, oh, we can go do that. But I've learned over the years I need to put parameters on it. Why? Because I can't tell you how many students I've had fail this assignment. The assignment is go play. Have a day of play. Come back to class. Tell us about it. I'm not asking you to write a paper. I'm not asking you to do a PowerPoint. Just tell us about it. And invariably, there's always at least one student that's like, oh, I thought about doing it, but I've got so much going on in my life, I couldn't do it. To which I often respond, okay, so you didn't meet the expectations of the assignment. I get that. Do it again. Go do it. But I've had to put parameters on it. So now I say, go do 3 hours. Pick 3 hours. Engage in something spontaneous, enjoyable, meeting some of those definitions. And it's not lost on me that true play needs to be a voluntary activity and non-goal directed. But I've got to meet you somewhere and help scaffold some of this, because as adults, sometimes we've forgotten what it's like to truly play. And after doing that activity, that assignment, so many students say, I didn't realize how much I've missed play, how much I need it. I didn't realize how powerful this was. I also have them do an activity I call the donut activity, where I have a picture of a donut, and I ask them to decorate this donut, and this donut's a representation of themselves. And they color this donut, and they do all this, and then I ask them, I say, okay, I'm looking around at all these donuts, and I see all the things that you've decorated, but one thing I notice is I have yet to have somebody only fill in the hole of the donut and not do anything else. And they say, well, why would you fill in the hole and not anything else? I said, exactly. But how many times do we do that in our own lives and when working with children, where we focus not on the donut, the good stuff that's there, and build upon that and decorate that, but instead we focus on the whole, what's missing, what's not there, and we try to fill that all the time. Which if you fill that, you might not have a true donut, you have some other pastry then. Right? We try to change it into something that it's not, versus build upon what's there. And when we engage in play, we start to recognize the good stuff is not what's missing, but is what's there. And so having this shift in perspective, because I think it's important that when we're engaging with people, particularly with children, we need to ask ourselves, what I'm doing, this type of engagement, this activity that I'm asking, is this to identify or address the need of this child or this person, or is this to meet the expectations and comfort level of an adult or somebody else? Because if it's to meet the expectations and comfort level of adult, it might not be meeting the needs of this child or this person that I'm working with. Ideally, those things match up. And if those things can match up, then we have the optimal kind of therapeutic environment or the healthy environment. But so many times that's not the case. So I think we need a perspective shift. And by embracing play, we can learn how to recognize the person rather than the perceived problem. We can focus on the donut, not the hole. We can start to recognize the present rather than just the past. We can focus more on feelings and that brain integration I was talking about earlier rather than just thoughts or acts. We can also start to recognize understanding and how important that is rather than just explaining. We can start to recognize the importance of accepting rather than just correcting. We can start to recognize the child's direction or even our own direction if we're adults. What's the direction of this person? How can we empower that versus an adult or someone else's instruction? And then finally, we can start to recognize a child's wisdom, or maybe if we're adults, our own wisdom, rather than another adult's knowledge. And I think it's vitally important that we start to recognize those things because that can help us to be able to navigate our world in a more healthy way. Now, as we mentioned, play is communication. Verbal versus non-verbal communication. We're looking at what's said versus what is actually communicated. What is understood. Play, as we mentioned before, represents the most natural form of communication for humans. But also, why is that? It is because play as communication actually promotes interaction and connection. Now, there's 4 messages that a child sends through their play. And that is, this is what I've experienced. This is my reaction or feeling towards those experiences. This is what I need, want, or wish was true. And finally, this is how I perceive myself. If you pay attention to a person's play, especially a child, this is what they're communicating. Usually within a few minutes, I can have a general sense of what's happening in someone's home by looking at the child's play, because they're communicating these things. By the same token, if we engage in play with others, especially with children, adults can send what we call 4 healing messages. This is sometimes called the be with attitudes as well. The thing that I'm doing, my interaction with this child through this play, hopefully I can send the message of I'm here, I hear you, I understand, and I care. If you can communicate those 3 messages, a 4th one becomes automatic. That 4th one becomes automatic, the I care. So if I can communicate, I'm here, I hear you, and I understand, the person knows that I care. And that can go so far in helping them to be able to grow and navigate the world that they're in. Now, play-based interventions. If you're using play, it can help foster adaptive behaviors through creativity, role rehearsal, mind-body integration. These are all the benefits of using play and play-based interventions. But not just for kids. Play for adults actually has been shown to increase self-esteem, can be affirming, can result in stress release, and promotes mastery of certain tasks. And it also facilitates communication and personal insight. Now, there are a variety of mediums that can be used when working with different age groups that involve play. For children, that could be toys, games, what we call doll play, puppets, psychodrama, creative and expressive mediums. Oftentimes with adolescents, you'll still see some doll play and use of puppets, but a lot more with psychodrama and role-playing and then those creative expressive mediums. And then with adults, if we're using play in our interactions and therapeutic interactions with adults, we see a lot what we call sand tray and sand play. Use of more games, creative and expressive mediums, psychodrama and role-playing. Now, if you notice, there's a lot of overlap. Why? Because play can be universal. Even when the medium changes, we can use similar types of approaches with all age groups. Now, play for adults can be a powerful tool. Some of you may not think about play as a tool, but it is. Play can be a powerful tool. Why? Because it opens up communication. It allows us to be able to engage in vulnerability, which allows us to connect more with one another. It's integrative. It helps us to connect the emotional with the symbolic and the concrete. Helps us make sense of our world. And it facilitates empathy, both affective and cognitive and somatically. It helps us to be able to know ourselves and know others. So, with all this being said, at the beginning I talked about so many times as adults we engage in play, but we like to call it something else. So let's go ahead and call it self-care, if that helps us to be more comfortable with it. Play is self-care, but it can be called many things. Play sometimes is called self-care. Sometimes we like to use the word mindfulness, because if you're being mindful, you're engaged in a form of play. It could be our hobbies. It could be our relaxation, how we relax and unwind. But ultimately, why do we need all this? Why? Because play facilitates lifelong learning. It helps us to have healthy coping. It helps us with our connection with others. And it helps us to be able to develop a deeper understanding of ourselves. So, with that, I think I've kept us long enough. But I do want to open it up for any questions that you may have about play.
Questions for Paul? Please raise your hand. I'll bring around the microphone so that you can ask.
I see one down here.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Listening to your talk, one of the things I have what is classified as a high degree of ADD.
Okay, yes.
And as a 77-year-old, I have been experiencing some of the trauma that I remember from my childhood. Mm. And one of the things that I realize about that is that I was perpetually bemused by the fact that I didn't understand what the problem was with other people in terms of my behavior. Mm-hmm. But that one of the things that would happen would be that because I was behaving in a certain way, I was deprived of the opportunity to play.
Yes.
Even to the extent of the fact that when I was at school, for one particular year, I was pretty well always kept in during recess because of the fact that either fidgeting or talking or whatever. And it strikes me that that is the very opposite of what I needed.
Yes, I would
and
say
so
it's probably being
counterproductive. I feel angry about that. And so I also suspect that one of the things that people that have ADD do is that when they are apparently distracted from doing what they should be doing, what they are doing is kind of discovering something else that has the element of play that they are going to do just because they want to.
Yes.
And even as a kind of protest against the idea of the fact that I have to fulfill what other people expect of me. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, and what you were describing about, that was something that happened and you felt this anger and this frustration, I think that's speaks to the high need that we do have for play. And so many times when I'm consulting with, for example, I go to schools a lot and consult and work with them. One of the things I try to point out is it may actually be counterproductive or counter to what you're wanting to help this child to be able to accomplish if you take away that play. Because that play is how they're going to develop the self-control skills to be able to navigate these interactions in a healthy and appropriate way. But if we take that away and we're trying to impose this on them without that ability to be able to communicate in that natural way and to be able to engage in that learning both cognitively and emotionally, then it can have detrimental effects which play out throughout the lifespan with that too. Now that doesn't mean that as an adult you can't start to engage in play and help to remediate and navigate and develop those skills. But it can be very challenging, especially for kids, if they're not allowed to engage in that way. And it often gets labeled with all these other labels, like you mentioned, ADHD, some of these other things. Not that those don't exist, they do. At the same time, sometimes it's maybe the kid needs to be allowed to play so that they can start to figure some of this out and make sense of their world. So thank you
Paul,
for
I
sharing.
have another question back here.
Yes.
What is your opinion on fidgets? I've asked around with a lot of people, and some people don't like them and some people like them, and I was wondering what you think of them.
I think fidgets can be something that can be very helpful, but also I think it has to be something that, again, is engaged with in a voluntary kind of way. Because I've sometimes seen adults tell kids or others, well, here's this fidget because, use that all the time instead of being able to engage in the way that you want to engage. Along with that, though, I think fidgets can be a form of play for people and helps them to be able to regulate and navigate the environment that they're in so that they can learn more about themselves and be able to interact more effectively with others. So I'm not against fidgets in and of themselves, but I don't think they should be forced either. Does that help?
Hi. If you were going to bring a group of adults together for play, and maybe they know each other well, maybe they don't, do you have any guidance or advice or tips or tricks that you use? Toys, whatever. I don't know what a sand tray is.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think it would depend on kind of what the intent or purpose would be. But if I was bringing a group together and just hoping to facilitate just open, free play with them, that can be a real challenge for many adults. Why? Because we've got this negative evaluation sometimes of ourselves, and we're apprehensive in being able to engage in some of that play. So then I have to kind of structure and scaffold some of that. But then once able to do that, then you start to see people start to connect and engage in different ways. And when I say scaffold and things, that's where we see the classic things like the icebreakers or the more structured games to get us started. But even in using some of those things, I don't want us to stop there. That's the beginning, not the end for some of this. And I think being able to foster a safe environment for us to be real, open, and vulnerable is how we engage in that true free play. And for many adults, like I said, that's a challenge, but it's not impossible. And so sometimes, like I was mentioning earlier, for me, one way that I found, and I have a group, in fact, some of them are here tonight, I have a group that I do music with, and we definitely engage in free play in more ways than one, using our instruments and engaging with one another. And shout out to my fellow, I'm part of a group called the Twang Gang. And for me, that's my play with other adults, is the Twang Gang. So.
What piece of advice would you give early childhood educators that you would find is the most impactful thing they can do in their classroom, who do already practice trauma-informed care,
Yes.
to help facilitate that classroom-wide on a scale of the entire class as opposed to the individual child?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I would encourage always ask that question that I mentioned earlier. This intervention or this activity, this thing that I'm about to do, is this to address the needs, identify or address the needs of the child, or is this to meet the comfort or expectations of an adult, including ourselves? Sometimes, as a teacher or an instructor, there are things that I realize, oh, I'm doing this. Why? Because this is my expectation or this is my comfort level. And I don't want to discount that, but we always want to ask that question. And with that, being able to recognize the needs of the kids in your class are varied. And sometimes the play behaviors are going to be unique and varied. And so as we help put things in place to facilitate some of the free play, and even if we're doing a directed play activity, recognizing that kids are not going to play uniformly, and allow space for that. And in my experience, the most effective classrooms aren't always the most organized or well, the quiet, those aren't always the most impactful classrooms. Now, I am not advocating for complete chaos, no. There needs to be some parameters, yes, and limits. At the same time, there needs to be the space that is created that allows for individuality and uniqueness and a variety of ways of expressing oneself. Does that help? Yeah.
So from a therapeutic viewpoint,
Yes.
how important would it be or beneficial would it be to incorporate play therapy with adults, either in an individual setting or like couples therapy or even family settings? And how would you go about incorporating that into those kind of sessions?
Yeah, I think it can be very impactful with adults. Again, the medium may look a little different. I'm probably not bringing most adults into my playroom that I use with 6-year-olds. You know, they're probably not bringing out the baby dolls. Though there has been a number of studies that's looked at for especially like geriatric populations. There is a doll play specific intervention for individuals who are older, especially those with dementia, that has been shown to have some efficacy. But oftentimes with adults, I will incorporate things like what we call sand tray, where we have a tray of sand and then they're playing and creating scenes within the sand using miniatures and small figurines. But also with families, I've done a wide variety of play-based interventions and approach working with families. And again, I truly believe the family that can learn how to play together can stay together. And with that, I've had families, we're engaging with different types of games or drama and role play, puppets. I use puppets a lot whenever I'm working with couples and families. So there's a wide range of play-based interventions, play therapy kinds of things that can be used with a wide age range, particularly with adults and families. So, yeah.
All right, folks. Unfortunately, we have to wind it down for the evening. I want to thank you all for coming out this evening. Remember that we kick off tomorrow morning at 9:30 down at the Goodstein Foundation Library. We would love to see you there for our sessions. Let's thank Paul for coming out one more time.
Thank you. Thank you. If you want all my references, I've got a whole bunch of them. I can share them with you. There they are. So.